Running a small business means I wear lots of hats. When I put on my hiring hat, I can count on LinkedIn Hiring Pro to make it easy. LinkedIn Hiring Pro helps manage my hiring workflow, puts my job post in front of a unique network of professionals, and matches me with the best candidates for my business. I can also share my job with my network. No other job site lets me do that. No wonder most small businesses say they'd use LinkedIn Hiring Pro again. Hire right the first time. Post your job for free on LinkedIn today at linkedin.com/quality.
Hi, I'm Andrea Claire, and this is my podcast. My guest today is Karen Schulman Dupuis, researcher, business designer, and the brains behind womendisrupted.ca. We're looking at a corporate world that seems intent on flatlining our careers. When you have 30 plus years of wisdom, killer instincts, and unshakable experience, you're suddenly too expensive. Add in that you're a woman in midlife and the corporate move is to just ghost you, hand you a pair of stretchy grandma pants and tell you to stay home. We expose the paradox that expects women to just evaporate once they hit their prime, as if 30 years of expertise can simply vanish. Karen's master's research blew the lid off the myth that midlife career pivots are empowering lifestyle choices. She's got the hard, cold data proving it's often a fight for survival. We're talking about why you're being gaslit by the system and why the entrepreneur label is a total myth. We don't opt out. We are pushed out. The fucking patriarchy. Ain't it grand? Well, Karen said it best on a t-shirt she revealed during a speaking event. Fuck that shit. Karen, welcome to the Fuck You 50s.
I was invited as a speaker to a conference and about, kind of the tech entrepreneurship space. And I was just exhausted by shit. And just so much, I call it the brotastic celebutante culture of the startup scene in Toronto. And so was doing the talk. So I had the t-shirt made while beforehand. And I was literally like having like more of like an informal conversation before like my actual talk. And somebody said something and I literally just stood up and unzipped and it just felt like we're going to stick with that, Yeah, absolutely.
Oh God, I love it. So you're from Canada. Whereabouts are you based?
I'm in Hamilton now.
Okay.
Raised in Toronto, moved here about 8-9 years ago.
Tell me about Women Disrupted and how did you come to that?
I was about 46 or so when I started to first kind of like really experience this disruption in my own career. And so I had left the Toronto tech innovation startup scene. And, at the time I was referred to as the most connected person in Toronto. And I used to be like, with no power. But so I was everywhere. I knew everybody. It was also like very intentional work. Like I was showing up for years. I was never home. I commuted 3,200 hours over 3 years. So, it was a lot. Like it was a commitment for sure. And then I was exited out of a job because funding wasn't available to sustain my position any longer. And then I ended up looking for work and could not find a job, wasn't even getting interviewed. And it was really wild because we had decided to move cities. My husband and I had decided I needed to move cities. My options were just like really limited. And he was like, do you have a job to go through? And I was like, no, I'm not worried about it. I'll show up and I'll go get a job. Like, I'm not worried. Yeah. And it was a wild experience. So, and then I started just talking to women who were my cohort and my friends. And, they were like, yeah, like I'm getting ghosted and I'm not getting promoted and things are happening when I'm not in the room. And just all these kind of like really repetitive experiences that women were sharing with me. So, I went through a little bit of an existential crisis, of course. And this is also the confluence of perimenopause. So that was a fun time. And then I did what a lot of women do. I went back to school and I thought, I'm going to make myself so hireable, so unavoidable. It's going to be amazing. Yeah. And as I lovingly say, narrator says, in fact, people, it wasn't quite so as it seemed. So I ended up doing my master's in leadership at Royal Roads University in Victoria.
Okay.
And the program is really about systems and systems change. And so, you go through your first year and it's a foundational leadership theory, incorporating like complexity theory and systems theory. And then our second year is when we either do like a full research path, or as my friend said to me, you want to talk about shit or do you want to do shit? And I said, I want to do shit. And he's like, go do shit.
I love that.
So I did, I chose to do my own research. I chose to do a capstone and, and as they say, research is me search. And so what I started to recognize was that I was not the only person going through this kind of experience, and also within the program, I was probably like the third eldest person in the program. And, I had a really hard time with my cohort because I'm a woman of a particular age and I'm not afraid to open my mouth and say things. So I was really quite othered and it was really challenging. And this was, before I could really understand what I was experiencing in the context. And so, that's how it came to be. So I started looking at the career disruption of women who were over 40. And my original research was focused in on the Hamilton area because that's where I was living. And of course, to, do that kind of, qualitative research, you need to have obviously a local sponsor. So I worked with my local YWCA, the CEO there, Denise Christopherson. And so we looked at it from like an economic development ecosystem. And what should this local economic ecosystem do to help support women so that their response time is mitigated and the time it takes for them to kind of reach financial security again is also shortened. So that was the original research and the impetus to it.
And it's a global thing too, right? We get aged out of things. Like even as an artist, I'm getting aged out of my career. Like it's so frustrating. And it's just such a weird phenomenon that it does seem to be just happening to women in midlife. Like, why is that?
Well, I think it's a whole bunch of stuff, right? Like I really do. So there's this whole, which I love it. You've seen Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Amy Poehler and Tina Fey do the like, and I'm unfuckable now, right? So I'm invisible. So there's that piece of it. We become less valuable in the workplace because our age and our experience is seen as a hindrance rather than something that's valuable, which is crazy for me. There's an emerging awareness and building awareness around menopause and perimenopause and actually noting the disabling effects of this as a life experience. And so there's certainly emerging policy around that and it's growing, but it's like less than 1% of organizations that are actually spending any time making those accommodations or paying attention. And I think that there's like this ageism that happens. So it happens across the board, right? So for men, it starts at 45 and for women, it starts at 40. And it's fairly universal in that sense, but women have this other gendered experience on it, and so like when we look at the women in the workplace, you started mentioning, that there is, these experiences that women have in the workplace and there's different things that people have to fight in the workplace. And it's not to take away from the disruption that happens when women have children and then their careers are disrupted that way. Or, when we're called the shit or the shit sandwich generation because we're taking care of like our parents as well as we're taking care of our kids. And, so there's all of these caregiving things that fall to women. Like there's so many intersecting issues that impact us that happen at this age. And I think the difference is right now is that, I think the social platforms that we have are enabling us to find community like we never had before. I think we're also getting bigger profile in larger mainstream media. So like I remember being 45 or so, and I remember hearing Pia Chattopadhyay, who had a show on CBC on the weekends, and her second show that she had was talking about perimenopause. And I was like, yeah, okay, I'm paying attention. And she talked about this rise in anxiety. And I was like, oh my God, that's me. I'm pretty typically Gen X, which means I carry a lot of trauma. And I just got on with it in my life, right? But for like the first time in my life around that time, I just couldn't cope the way I'd always coped. So I feel like there's this, besides this gendered ageism intersection, And we haven't even addressed the issue of other identities. So if you're queer, if you're Black, neurodivergent, like we haven't incorporated any of those pieces, which of course, just layer on the issues that people deal with in the workplace. I
Yes.
think that there's an emerging voice and an emerging community where we're actually talking about the stuff that we avoided or we didn't even know that was coming because it was always kind of skirted under the rug. And so I think that that's made a huge difference in building awareness that this is an actual issue. And that was part of it for me as well, Andrea. Like was when I started looking at this, I was like, this is a pattern. Like, this is not just me. Like, is it just me? No, it's not just me. Because, I have my own quirks and personality traits that I bring to the workplace. So women tend to internalize this. And what I want to help do is say, fuck that shit, and stop internalizing this and address the systems issues as they are.
So do you think that corporations are starting to kind of listen and make these steps to help women in the workplace? Or do you think more and more women are just like in our age category kind of starting their own ventures and I guess for various reasons being either made redundant or choosing to leave?
So women turn to entrepreneurship out of necessity. They don't do it out of desire. And that was one of the most compelling pieces of insight that I garnered from my data. So the research shows that women were turning to entrepreneurship because they couldn't find a job. And then they were getting desperate. So they started to hang out their shingle, as a consultant, doing freelance, whatever it may be, right? That was like one of those common responses to their experience. But the really important piece of that is that 80% of the women that I interviewed for my research turned to entrepreneurship, and they did it out of necessity, but 100% of them did not call themselves entrepreneurs. They called themselves freelancers, or I bought a franchise, or there was like one person who had a tech solution and she was building like a subscription box, and she started talking about being a startup, but she never referred to herself as an entrepreneur. So I think that that's a really important insight.
It's interesting too, because I've heard a lot of women call themselves founders as well.
Yes.
What's stopping them from calling them an entrepreneur?
Yeah. It's a soft pedal approach, right? Like I spent years very explicitly in kind of the startup tech environment in Toronto. I call it the celebrity brtastic startup culture of Toronto. So I'm a little jaded. Let me just put like my bias on the table, right? So that we're all very clear how I'm coming to this. It is the cult of personality. And that cult of personality is predominantly male. It's predominantly like 25 to 35. And it's all celebrated from that perspective. So this language around entrepreneurship that has been touted for now decades, right, through the provincial programs, municipal programs, and federal programs, as well as like private partner relationships and supported kind of programming as well, all talks about entrepreneurship. But the reality is that women are not very welcome in these environments to begin with. And so that's its own struggle. But they don't see themselves as entrepreneurs. It's just not their language. So all this programming that exists, which can be very beneficial, unless you're in university and you're getting funneled into these entrepreneurship programs that become part of your vernacular and you're building your awareness about it, just actually is not inviting to women because they don't see themselves in that programming. They don't see themselves as an entrepreneur.
Maybe it's kind of what you're saying, as well as maybe a lot of it is just like psychology, or psychologically to them. Maybe they're just thinking it's toxic, so they didn't want to be part of a toxic community. Would that be?
I hope so. Like, I really do hope so that it's more of a choice. Unfortunately, don't think it's really the case. Like, I really wish it was like a whole bunch of like, fuck that system. But I think it really is. Well, I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm not building a tech solution. So like, to get back to kind of like the why is it unwelcoming? Women build small businesses. And that is derided in the tech space. Unless you're building something that is high potential, scalable, right? Then you're not getting any investment dollars and whatnot. But the reality is that the vast majority of businesses in Canada are small businesses. And there is nothing wrong with an organization or somebody wanting to keep their business between 1 and 10 or 1 and 20 people, which is still a big business. And it can still be a multi-million-dollar business at that size. But if it's not scalable, then it's derided, right? So these were called lifestyle businesses by investors, and they were instantly shut down from being considered as investable. So that's, that toxicity, unfortunately, is seeded through those kinds of conversations.
So if a woman is kind of, she's got a disrupted career, she's trying to find her path, where can you come in to help, or what can they kind of turn to?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the question. So there's a couple of things I'm working on right now. So the first is honestly just getting this idea out there and just letting women know to stop gaslighting themselves, that it's not just them, that it's not just me, it's not just my friends. I don't want them to internalize it anymore. I want them to recognize that there are systemic issues at play here. And so part of it is just letting them know, because the reality is, as soon as I say it out loud, as soon as I have this conversation with anybody on a one-to-one, on a larger scale, part of it is just the recognition, and they go, "Oh my God, of course!" Now they see it everywhere, right? It's the Bader-Meinhof phenomena, like when you hear something and then all of a sudden you see it everywhere. It's the same sort of thing. As soon as you hear that this is happening, or you see it, or somebody plants a seed, then you look around and you go, "Holy shit! It's not just me, actually," right? And then you start to watch these things that are happening around you and to your friends and cohorts. So that's That's one part. The other part is through my research and through my my master's program, some of the learning that we did, I came across this model called the adaptive cycle. And the adaptive cycle is basically, it's an infinity loop. And without getting into like a lot of like the weeds, but essentially what it is it's a pattern of disruption and recovery. And it was started off by a Canadian ecologist, actually, because Buzz Halling, which is amazing. And he looked at what happens to forests, right? And those ecosystems when there's a fire, and then how does it recover? And so this like complexity model, I started looking at it, and I'm also informed by like this economist called Schumpeter, and he's talking about creative destruction and how like to really have growth, you need to like kind of incorporate destruction as a part of that path. And I started just to see these different pieces, and I recognized that actually disruption is a model, and it's a repeatable pattern. And, further research has given me insight that it happens between every like 18 months to 3 years. And so part of the programming that I'm, hoping that people will sign up for and that they'll be interested in is just to work through this workshop where you actually get to kind of model your life, and you get to look at what happened to you in your latest stage of disruption, and then identify how you responded, who was there, who wasn't there, and then be able to actually map out your life so that you can recognize that this is actually a repeatable pattern. And my contention is that when you know that disruption is a pattern, identifying where you are allows you to better prepare for the inevitable disruption that's coming your way, so that it's not quite so devastating. Because disruption doesn't have to mean devastation. It often does, right? So giving people a little bit of insight to say, oh my God, this is actually something I can anticipate coming within the next time frame. How can I better prepare for that? Whether it's savings, whether it's shoring up people, whether it's doing more, hustles on the side to be able to support your income, like whatever it may be, it's all very individual, right? And so part of it is identifying it as a pattern and getting that piece of information out there to help women prepare for this kind of disruption. There's a lot of insights that come from that as well.
This episode is brought to you by Google Health. Stop chasing someone else's definition of health. What matters is what's healthy for you. Google Health offers a new kind of coach built with Gemini for effortless tracking, sleep insights, and holistic coaching tailored to you. Visit googlestore.com to learn more and start a new relationship with your health. Requires Google account, Google Health app, internet, and Google Health Premium subscription. Features subject to change. Availability and results vary. Not intended for medical purposes. Works independently of Gemini apps. Check responses for accuracy.
Do you hear that? Sounds like breakfast is ready. Because Quaker's coming in hot with morning nutrition. 100% whole grain oats and a good source of fiber. to fuel the rhythm of your morning and kickstart your day. And that sounds absolutely delicious. Fuel to start whatever's next. Quaker, official sponsor of FIFA World Cup 26.
And would it be kind of more of a pattern, like overall, generally for women in this age category, or does everyone would have their own like unique pattern? Does that make sense?
I would say it's universal. This is like the adaptive cycle. You can look at your own life and you can see that it's universal. But again, like research is research, right? You don't see this stuff until you're in front of it. And then you're like, oh, what the hell? And so when you can actually step back, and my contention is that when you can map out your life and then kind of go back. So like what I did was I found this concept, right? I was looking at all these data points and then I literally went back to the time that I was 17 years old and living on my own. And I mapped my entire life, and good God, like literally it was 18 months to 3 years. and then I was looking at these patterns, and part of it is like, how do you show up and who was there and what are you repeating? What's working for you? What's not working for you? And so part of that insight was just like really powerful for myself because it allowed me to reflect. It allowed me to look at the things that I don't want to repeat. And so like, as an individual, I'm going through this. And so what I also say though, is that if you're working within a company, you can actually identify what cycle your company is in, and you can identify what stage of that cycle that they're in as well. And then taking it broader from your sector, what stage of that cycle is your sector in? So like at any given time, we are in our own path, we're in our own cycle. And then our sectors are, our companies are, and we can be at completely different places than those other environments that we find ourselves in. So yeah, it's totally a universal thing. But personally, I give shit more about women who are over 40 and I want their future to be more secure. So that's why my focus is women over 40.
So the career disruption often hits at the exact same time as perimenopause, menopause, and the sandwich generation, as you mentioned, the caregiving responsibilities. How do you see this impact the women who you work with?
So I think the most critical piece that really we need to rally around is the fact that this is financially devastating for women. And the reality is that most women don't recover from this kind of disruption. Myself personally, I have faced it myself. I know that there are women out there, women in from my original research, who went from making six figures to making minimum wage. People who have been on EI because they had no other resources, people who've turned to disability supports because they've had no other resources. So the financial impact to being disrupted and not being prepared for that disruption, and not as I was telling from the top, right? Like I was like, of course I'm going to get a job,
Yeah.
I have no problem. I've done it my whole life.
Yeah.
You don't have that same opportunity. You don't get the same interviews. You don't get the same invites. And so for those people who are like, these women who are like, well, I've never had a problem. Well, that's great. There's probably a whole package of privilege around you, that enabled you to not have this kind of experience. But the reality is that, so like for me, this is so important, Andrea, because it's like, it impacts women's futures. It impacts their retirements. It impacts their housing situations. It impacts their health. These are all related, and there is a downstream impact, and it's an undue burden that women carry.
I have a podcast coming out with a woman who's a writer by trade, tech writer. She's also written a book. But she was talking about how she's got this strong resume, tech writer, can't get any work as a tech writer. And she's like, I'm very good at what I do.
Yeah.
And part of it is, of course, like ageism. She said like 28-year-olds are getting hired to do things and she just costs more money.
Sure.
But then it's like the ageism mixed in with the sexism as well, like the gender. And you can't force people to hire you, but it does seem to be just this frustrating thing that, like you're saying, is just affects women in midlife so much.
Yeah.
Another thing too that I find interesting, just kind of like on that whole ageism, is and I've found it with myself, like because my eldest daughter's in her 30s, and I've had people ask me, "Oh, are you excited about being a grandmother someday?" But my husband has never been asked that question.
Of course. Of course.
And whether I'm excited about being a grandparent or not should have like no basis.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's bizarre to me.
Yeah, but that's like, what you're doing is you're identifying this like inherent inference that our value is in our reproduction, our value is in our maternal role, and that is what is most pivotal about us. I can tell you, being a grandmother is awesome. My eldest daughter is 34. I've got 3 and 5-year-old grandkids. They're amazing. Grandma is awesome. They love me. I'm the coolest. And I have a lot of fun with that. But that is not entirely who I am. It's a part of who I am, But of course, yeah, my husband has never been asked that. And so it's like these insipid, subtle, passive ways that women are experiencing kind of the patriarchy, and we're experiencing these systemic and social pressures to show up in certain ways. And again, our value is like more on that than it is for our intellect, our impact, what we contribute to research, what we contribute to the economy. Let's not even get started about the unpaid labor of women and how it actually sustains our economy. And if women, oh my God, would just actually en masse strike, our economy would shut down. Like, I wish that we could collectively understand the power we had and just like shut shit down to make people pay attention. I believe it was the Dutch women who did it in the 70s. Like, God bless them. Unfortunately, we've never kind of realized that.
Yeah. How do current innovation ecosystems and business incubators ignore the specific needs of women 40 to 64? And what would a truly inclusive support system look like?
I love that. Thank you for asking, because this is like where I get really hot and bothered. So the innovation ecosystem, and I'm not to say that there's not a lot of good that happens, because absolutely. Like, I worked for an organization historically that really focused in on like life sciences and health startups, and like the impact is literally wild, like potentially wild, like paradigm shifting their outputs and their solutions. So I'm not degrading the value of it or anything else. And also, this organization was working so hard to keep IP in Canada, another really important thing. So like, I don't denigrate those kinds of goals, but here's what happens. You have, Techstars and Y Combinator, which are the two biggest like global brands for innovation ecosystems. One of them is led by a total misogynistic fascist Fokker. The other, not so much, intentionally great organization. However, what everybody else in the world does is they cut and paste, right? So they copy their programming and all of their startup programming, and then they paste it, and then they deliver it from that perspective into this kind of like into whichever ecosystem that they land in. So there's a problem with that. Number one, that it is just literally copy paste. The content is great. I've audited these programs. I've been involved in these programs. The problem is that they're overwhelming. If you're not part of this ecosystem and you don't understand the language, there's already a barrier. Right? So let alone this moniker of entrepreneur. If you don't understand what, a cap sheet is, and you don't understand what a Series C is, and you don't understand kind of what these milestones mean, and then just the ecosystem language around the startup program, you're coming in from behind. And so I've watched it happen. It's good content, but it's overwhelming. And then they try to get you from MVP, which is minimum viable product, right? So minimum viable product to launch in 12 weeks. You're like, okay, but I'm at the same time having to learn a language. Oh, and I'm also taking care of my kids. Oh, and I'm also taking care of my parents. Oh, and I'm also trying to sustain my business or like my regular job so that I don't lose my income entirely. So there's all of these considerations that are not taken into account. I have a lot of issues with this model. The first being is that you have these people who are at the intake of this programming, and they think they know everything and they don't know shit. Or they know a little bit of shit. But here's what I believe. I believe that these women who are being disrupted generally have decades of deep domain knowledge, right? They're coming from sectors and spaces where they've been forever. So I call it, an inch wide and 10 feet deep. Like, they actually know their shit beyond. But they may not know that they have a business idea. Like, they probably have a solution. They probably know that there's a problem that impacts a sector or an industry as a whole. And they probably have insight and they can build towards a solution, but they don't know that they have a solution yet. And so they do these entrepreneurship programs, and then they have this idea, and then they get in front of like a third week of a 12-week or a 9-month program. Ridiculous. And they are, because they don't understand it, what they do to these women, they go pivot, pivot, pivot. And then these women feel insecure about their ideas, and they feel insecure about their environment. So they go, okay. And so they pivot and they start working on something they don't know that well, they don't give a shit about, and is not their idea. But it serves the venture capitalists or the support programs, initiatives, and where they want to squeeze people. So I don't believe that these models work for women. I believe that when you're asking them to commit to 12 weeks, that is a ridiculous amount of time. There's a new program that's actually been launched, and it's like 9 months long. I'm like, y'all are so ridiculous. So here's what I realize is that, I know this is my rant, but I told you I was going to get hot and bothered about this.
I'm happy for it. Yes.
Okay. I love it. Thank you. But so here's the thing is, I'm not delusional enough to think that you are going to be able, me, whatever, it's going to be able to completely shift this ecosystem, right? It's doubly entrenched based on all of the funding and the attention it gets and blah, blah, blah. Okay?
Right.
But we have to find a way to get women to bridge this ecosystem better. So one of the other pieces of programming that I'm working on is essentially catching women when they've been disrupted. Some women just want another job. They just want to be reemployed. So how can we help them assess what their risk assessment is, how much risk they're willing to take on, if they even remotely have an idea? And those who are needing reemployment, let's put them into resources that are meant for them. Much like we have like the youth employment programs, right? Like that warm handshake into an ecosystem, and they can help them get a job and bypass the ATS systems, which are also horrifically biased. Let's do that. Okay. And those women who think that they might have an idea, there is a really simple approach that we can take. We can help them define their product. We can help them figure out if there's an addressable market and what their value prop is. That is my proposal and the programming that I'm building is 3 weekends, 1 day a weekend. Women can do that. They can figure out supports for that. And then having that framework, they can figure out at the end of 3 weeks whether or not they have an idea that they want to pursue or not. And that is what they need. They need a shorter time frame rather than this ridiculous 12-week commitment up front where they're going to be unduly influenced, to just determine that they actually have a viable idea, so that when they walk in and they intersect and they start to engage with this existing ecosystem, they're far more confident. They have way more data and insight to support them, and they can be way more successful rather than being, hey, we have 20% uptake in women participating in our programming, which they're not reporting on is that 85% of them have bailed out before the halfway mark.
Wow.
So that's my rant. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for coming to my Karen talk.
Yeah, honest to God. Not that Karen. Karen, not that Karen.
No, not the Karen. I have a theory on the whole Karen kind of thing. And I'm not talking about the women that are racist and inappropriate and horrific in general. I feel like we've come way too quick to call a woman a Karen, quote unquote, a woman in midlife, and it's just another way to try and silence women.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So this is how I experience it. Being a middle-aged woman, being Karen, the phrase, first of all, doesn't belong to white people, period. It belongs to the Black community. The Black community are the ones who started to use it as an way to ID women who are, just white women, period. But white women who are doing harm, right? Who are using their power in a way to do harm. Absolutely based on racism, all the microaggressions, all the direct aggressions, all of it. So it doesn't belong to white people, period. So shut the fuck up. It's not yours to use, period. And I agree with you. I think people who use it, those are the people, I know exactly who I'm talking to on the other end of that conversation. So I know who to block and I know who to avoid, right? Yeah. Those are just, they're lazy. The internalized misogyny is wild. The perpetuation of a patriarchal system, wild choice. I agree with you on that front. But I feel really strongly about its origin and really who has the right to use it.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are the most common fundamental assumptions that career coaches get wrong about women in midlife?
Oh, that they're not confident. First of all, the word just needs to just die. I hate that word. Can't you just? You have no idea how I cannot just. And also, just is so dismissive of like our lived experience. This is not a confidence issue. It may be after a while when we think that we're crazy and we're gaslighting ourselves to think that we're the problem. We're not. And as I've been saying, right, we have this deep domain knowledge. We've got a massive amount of experience. We question ourselves. And the reality is that we don't need somebody to boost us up. I think the imposter syndrome conversation, while it was relevant in the 90s and 2000s, I think is also irrelevant. I think this has nothing to do with imposter syndrome. I think we need to identify the systemic issues at hand. And those are the things that we're up against, right? Like right now, I'm involved in a coaching program, and having some of the people sit in front of me and tell me what they're experiencing and not getting the job as a manager because somebody half their age with half of their experience is getting the job. And I just honestly hold space for them right off the get-go and say, it's not you. That this is grossly unjust. And this is a real thing that you're facing, and to take away that gaslighting.
Yeah. It's so interesting, just the whole, like, it's not you. And I know like for me, like my experience is a different job scope working in fashion and beauty, but it's interesting. There is a morning program here in Toronto. I guess it's across Canada on television. They were looking for a beauty expert for just different people that have on-camera experience. And I used to be on TV. I've done makeover shows, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I would love to be considered as a beauty expert, but what I will not do is I don't want to be on camera telling women what they're doing wrong. And like, you're in your 50s. This is what you're doing wrong with your hair color. This is why you should be coloring your gray, like all that bullshit. I've been in this industry for like 35 years. The funny thing is, nobody called me.
Sure.
There was like zero interest whatsoever, which fine, fair enough. Obviously, they were looking for probably somebody younger and probably somebody that is going to go on camera and tell you what you're doing wrong with your lipstick.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. Please shove that anti-aging shit up your ass. Like, I am not interested in not aging. I have earned every single one of these wrinkles, and I know people can't see me, but like, I am full silver. I also never cut my hair. This is my intentional fuck you to the system hair. Because when I was working in that startup space, in that ecosystem space, I colored my hair all the time. And I remember someone saying to me, why? And I said, because these kids aren't going to come talk to an old lady. Right. So I recognized that I was perpetuating it, but I was also recognizing that I wasn't going to be successful. I was doing a lot of outreach and community action and engagement with startups and finding them and bringing them into the ecosystem. They were going to talk to me if I looked like an old fart, right? So I was very much aware of it, for sure.
Actually, my very first podcast guest, also a friend of mine, was a TV host. I used to live in Singapore, and she was a TV host for HBO Asia, and she was solid gray, but I was coloring her hair for her every 3 weeks. And she wanted to stop coloring her hair. And HBO Asia told her, sure, absolutely, you can totally stop coloring your hair. When you do, you'll no longer be on TV. And they outright said that to her.
At least they were upfront about it, because Lisa LaFlamme certainly got screwed, right? A lot of the research that kind of exists around this gendered ageism, there's not a ton of it. So part of it is, as an independent researcher, I'm hoping to contribute to the literature. But part of it is also, it's mostly focused in on broadcasting or people in the public eye versus what it's like in everyday corporate culture. So this is part of what I hope to address through my work. The programming to support women, like, that's kind of where my love language is, because I've been in training and learning and development for decades, and Marcom and all the operations processes, all the rest of it. But part of what I would also love to do is to be able to get in front of these organizations, and because one of the biggest questions for me, Andrea, is like, what is the cost to an organization when you have this deep domain knowledge and this incredible amount of IP walking out the door every year? So like every corporation out there, we can say pretty as a carte blanche statement, suck balls at trying to capture institutional knowledge, right? So
Is that a corporate phrase?
yeah, absolutely. We'll circle back to that. Yeah. But they're terrible at capturing institutional knowledge. So you have all of this knowledge from an institutional perspective that's walking out the door, but then you have all of this perspective and experience that's also walking out the door. And the cost to the organization can be multi-million dollars. Like a 200-person organization, at the baseline, it can be $2 million a year. And that's really only addressing the HR costs, the talent recruitment, churn, all of that management. It's not including the impact to the knowledge capture or to the IP that's walking out the door. And I haven't quite figured out how to approach that work without it being exploitative yet. And so I just refuse to participate in an exploitative solution. So I'm working on that part still.
Not that I have to ask you to be unfiltered, but what is the most unfiltered truth you discovered during your research that people are still too uncomfortable to talk about?
Yeah, the unfiltered truth. In a sense, honestly, women are afraid to talk about their aging. They're afraid to talk about their lived experience at this stage of life. We're afraid to talk about our perimenopause and the rise in anxiety and the rise in stress. We're afraid to talk about, especially for kind of Gen X women, the discovery of ADHD or not being neurotypical and how that intersects, because we were, of course, ignored. And one of the reasons why there's so many women identifying or finding that they're diagnosed with ADHD at this stage of life is because we started looking into it for our kids. And then we saw symptoms and we're like, oh, that might be me too. But we've been ignored, right? So there's a medical intersection right there as well. We're afraid to address what the mental health impact is on us for all of these things. So I've been increasing my my engagement on Threads recently. There are stories of women who are just devastated by being overlooked, by being exited, by not being able to get interviews. The job market sucks, yes. But again, all of these women with this deep domain knowledge and this deep experience, decades of it, and their 200 resumes, 400 resumes, 2 years unemployed. And watching that happen it's a devastation to watch.
I have a lot of women that reach out to me asking for what can they do to have themselves look younger. And they don't necessarily want to do anything extra. And not that I would recommend any extreme for anybody. I mean, I get some Botox. I like Botox. I do it for myself.
No judgment. No judgment.
Yeah. But people are asking me, what should I do? I'm trying to get a job, or I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job, or I'm afraid I'm going to lose my husband. Like it's this fear that obviously is stemming from, getting older as well. And it's just...
And just a reality, right? Like I remember being in my early 40s and saying to a girlfriend of mine, like the rise in anxiety and like my husband who will never divorce me, will never leave me. I was like, what? And she goes, she goes like, listen, your entire life you've been conditioned to hear that by the time you hit 40, you're going to be replaced. So like, no wonder you're having these thoughts. So, and really, this is part of like why I want to get the message out about this phenomena and what this life experience is. I don't want women to think that they're alone, and I don't want them to internalize this shit. And I think that the moment that you hear that this is happening, they go, okay, great. First of all, it's not just me. And then they go, holy fuck, that's unfair. And you go, yeah, so I want you to get mad. But the flip side of this is, I've said this for years as well, as I want 20-year-old women to embrace their 40-year-old boys, and I want 40-year-old women to embrace their power. This is like a system shift, and this is, a systems change. And the more we talk about it, the more culturally it changes. And I think this is one of the reasons, like, we've seen the difference with perimenopause and menopause, right? That we're talking about it more, and there's way more profile on it. So, it's shifting things. And this is a part of that same experience, different, but intersecting with it. And so I really I want to be able to let women know that they're not alone and that this is a thing.
Definitely. I even had a friend of mine this morning that was messaging me before she's going to work, just about some things that she's kind of dealing with the whole anxiety and getting older. And I just said to her, like, I said, don't know, I don't want to sound like I'm brushing her off, but I said from my podcast and talking to women all the time in our age category, you're not alone. I don't know if that makes you feel any better, but every woman in midlife that I've experienced, like there's not been one outlier that hasn't felt this way.
Totally.
So it's just, getting the word out there, having the conversations, showing that there's possibilities out there for women, meeting other women, getting help, whichever.
Absolutely. And I think like it's one thing to say that, right? You're like, you're not alone. Like other women are going through it, but it's another thing to read it and look at these narratives and these stories that are coming from real women's lives where you go, oh my God, me too. Now I'm a woman sitting in Canada, but so in the States, I feel like it's obviously worse for so many reasons. I can't even imagine. But like when you're reading it, there's a difference when you can see yourself in these narratives. It's one of the reasons why the work on diversity and inclusion has been so important, and because I believe so deeply that representation matters. So, the age, I know that people have said this, I'm not the first person to say this, but they're like, the ageism is like the last ism that's acceptable. I would agree, but I also think that, there's other identities that face a lot worse conditions and experiences than ageism.
Yeah. If you could strike one phrase or a piece of career advice from the lexicon of women over 45, what would that be?
Just start. Just start. Yeah, fuck that. Here's what I want to say in response to that. Just grieve. Hold space and be sad. Be kind to yourself. Hold that little part of you that feels rejected and dejected and ignored and unvalued and that you don't belong. How about just hold space for that and go through the grieving and go through the healing? And then maybe you can start.
Wow, that's so good. When you were saying that, I just was thinking about like myself. So I'm also Gen X. I think women that are listening to my podcast are most likely Gen X. And I feel like we've gone through so much growing up. We were latchkey kids, did things on our own. There was a lot of us that experienced trauma. But it was kind of like you just become a survivor and you just kind of move on. And I feel like what we're dealing with women in midlife right now, whether it's disrupted jobs or something in your life, so yeah, like maybe it's about time we take a moment, take a beat, like you're saying, give yourself that time to grieve, think about it. And that was great, Karen. I love that.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I'll share this. I'm pretty transparent with things, but I've come off of a couple of really horrific work experiences, like betrayals by friends, toxic environments, incompetent leadership, all of those things. And like you said, we're survivors. We just like, come on, rally. Let's go for the next job. Rally, pay the bills, right? Because I was also, in my younger years, I was a single mom for 9 years. So it was always like, roof over my head, clothes on my back, food in my belly. What do I got to do to cover those things? And it just moving on. And I had a role about 1.5 years ago, and it was amazing. I worked with an amazing team. I was invited in. I was doing really important work, both internally within the organization and externally, and the impact that I was having with the work I was doing. And I loved it. And then they were not successful in landing a big client RFP. And I was the most expensive executive, so I was the first to go. So no harm, no foul, right? Was actually a good exit. But what happened shortly after was my first experience with total burnout, like complete and utter executive dysfunction, like not depression, not sadness, not I just need a break for a few weeks. This was burnout, and it was devastating. So I'm going through that. And I'm also in the midst of this, of therapy. So I'm going through this therapy, and I'm diagnosed with complex trauma, which is very much I would say, a Gen X thing. Because as you said, just get on with it. Yeah, so, blah, blah, blah. Like, I mean, we could all tell our trauma stories and get on with it, right? And So I haven't been employed for like a year and a half, a little bit of time here, a little bit of work, pickup kind of thing. I just wasn't capable. And there's a ramification. Our savings are done. We're probably putting our house up for sale shortly because we just haven't been able to sustain that. So unless things change kind of imminently, and yes, I'm sitting in a seat of privilege where I have a spouse, we have supports. I had some access to resources; those have petered out, and I have a property that I can sell, so it's not going to be a great response, but better than not. So I'm not in peril. But there's so much shame that comes along with that, and so much sadness that comes along with this, because you feel like you're a failure. But the reality is that if I hadn't had the space this last year and a bit to sit and heal, I don't know where I'd be. Like, I really don't. And I don't mean that to sound hyperbolic at all. It's just, I couldn't have done this healing if I was working. And I was saying to my husband, like, oh my God, if I was working full time trying to do this, I can't imagine what that would be like. Because you know what? There were days I just had to sit in a chair and not do anything and not read and not be productive and not lose the 25 pounds and not launch the new thing and not do the thing, and that's where the shame spiral kind of happens.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to share that this has been part of my experience as well. I am literally living my research and I have been for 10 years. So I know this shit intimately. And it's really fucking hard. And I don't want people to negate how important that healing and that care is, however you can find it and however you can come across it, because I couldn't just start.
I can just imagine too, women that are listening to this, maybe they're kind of in that same space where they want to give themselves the time to grieve, but they're afraid to, because then again, it's like if they're having to step out of work or maybe step out of trying to find work or which of course you also need to be able to live. So I guess it's just trying to find the balance and what works.
There's real implications to this choice. Well, not a choice. There's real implications to it, right? And then you have to choose what your path is forward. And so this is that, for me, that hook back to that, financial security is why this is so important to me, and also why I want to get this message in front of people, the knowledge that this is inevitable. And I don't want to sound like an asshole or like depressing when I say that, but this is inevitable for women who are over 40. And I want the 20-year-old women to know this too, so that they can put aside their savings and they can do a better job of securing themselves and building those side visions and not relying on that, because we've been shown, especially in this market right now, we can't rely on that security and no one is protecting us. So we have to do it for ourselves and for each other. So that's it. Like the financial hit, the financial implication is massive. And and I want people to be prepared. I want women to be prepared.
Is it fair to say that we're probably the first generation where, like, I'm married, but I did spend like almost 10 years as a single mom as well with my older kids. But is it fair to say that our generation is kind of like the first generation where we're not like the wait till your father gets home kind of generation?
There's so much to kind of unpack with that. But I think
you're like, that's another hour, Andrea. I don't have time for this.
Sounds like you and I have a similar experience. But like the second round, like we chose partners, which is very different versus kind of the wait till your father gets home sort of relationship. Listen, I'll say it again too, though. Like, this is a cycle, right? This like emergence of like this trad wives bullshit and this internalized misogyny. And like, listen, babes, I would like to be a kept woman on the couch with my petunia pig bonbons and everything else as well. Like, we all have those moments, but like there's a lot that I think happens to us from a mental health perspective when we're not, quote unquote, earning our keep. And when we're not doing or we're not contributing, like there's that whole productivity narrative, that you've got to be productive to be valuable and whatnot. So I think it's a complex question, and I think it seeds a whole bunch of different things. But I do think generationally, like I think all of these issues are coming to a head because Gen X is built different, bitch. And where I think there's so many women who are taking a hit right now and they're feeling a little flattened. And I'd like to be part of that kind of phoenix rising.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fuck You 50s. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to follow and rate the podcast. And we would love to connect with you on Instagram. So be sure to follow us at the Fuck You 50s. The Fuck You 50s is hosted by Andrea Claire. See you next time.
To kids, summer isn't just time off. It's time spent building confidence and curiosity. But when school meals pause, millions of kids lose access to the food they count on during the school year. As a neighbor-led network, Feeding America is deeply rooted in every community, ensuring summer meals continue nourishing growth and potential. Your support puts healthy food within reach, fueling the future for kids and their families. Give now at feedingamerica.org/summerhunger.